a strategic confrontation took place in the South China Sea, involving Washington, Manila, and Beijing. Act 1. The Bait. On August 11, 2025, a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, the BRP Suluan, acted as bait near the Scarborough Shoal, also known as the Huangyan Islands. It drew the Chinese fleet into a series of tense encounters. The captain of the vessel successfully avoided 2 encirclements by the Chinese Coast Guard and military ships, demonstrating advanced navigation skills. Act 2. Loss of control. During the 3rd encirclement, Chinese military and Coast Guard ships reacting to the Philippine ships' deceptive maneuver collided due to poor coordination. The crash resulted in the disappearance of several crew members from the Chinese ships. Beijing's maritime strategy, which it had worked hard to build, collapsed in full view of the international community. Act 3. The Net tightens. On August 13th, the U.S. Navy's USS Higgins destroyer and USS Cincinnati littoral combat ship appeared off the horizon, entering within 30 nautical miles of Huangyan Island. At the same time, a Philippine Cessna aircraft carrying journalists flew dangerously close to a Chinese Su-30 fighter jet, capturing and broadcasting the event live to the world. While no weapons were fired in the South China Sea, Beijing's authority over the situation was effectively neutralized in this multifaceted operation, involving cognitive, electronic, and legal warfare. A carefully planned confrontation. To understand the hunt that occurred over 48 hours in the South China Sea, it is essential to look beyond the surface level and recognize the carefully coordinated strategy behind the events, orchestrated by Washington. The location remained Huangyan Island, but this time the Philippines and the United States were not passive. They were active participants, shaping the situation to their advantage. The operation began with the Philippine Coast Guard's BRP Suluan. This was not just a patrol vessel. It was deliberately used as bait in a calculated move. Despite China's familiar tactics, the Philippine captain, Zhou Ang, skillfully avoided 2 attempts to trap the vessel. The situation escalated during a 3rd attempt to encircle the ship. The captain, employing a deceptive maneuver, made a sharp turn, throwing off the coordination of the Chinese fleet. The resulting confusion led to a collision between Chinese ships, which had lost their positions in the chaotic response. The impact was followed by a prolonged, horrifying scream, as the lives of crew members were tragically lost in the crash. The sound echoed in a video that spread worldwide, capturing the aftermath of the tragic incident. Soon after, high-definition footage confirmed that the collision had caused the bow of one ship to twist and break apart, with crew members disappearing in the aftermath. Experts later concluded that the movement of Chinese ships in the area was likely part of a rescue operation, confirming the likelihood of casualties. Then, the U.S. Navy's USS Higgins destroyer entered the scene. Along with the USS Cincinnati littoral combat ship, they appeared within 30 nautical miles of Huangyan Island. The last U.S. freedom of navigation operation in this area occurred 6 years ago. During this time, Beijing had almost convinced the world that Huangyan Island was firmly within its control. This wasn't a routine patrol, but a carefully planned return. Data from the automatic identification system clearly shows that the USS Higgins entered the Sulu Sea on August 7th, crossed the Mindoro Strait on August 12th, and then headed straight north, almost appearing when it would be most embarrassing for Beijing. The appearance of the U.S. ships wasn't just another patrol, but a direct military challenge. The distance they chose, 30 nautical miles, was almost an art of humiliation. They did not enter the 12-mile zone, leaving no justification for firing, but they were close enough to apply direct military pressure. They forced Beijing into a situation where, even without firing, they had to acknowledge their weakness. What made this move even more lethal was the perfect coordination by the Philippines as the best on-site director. While the U.S. Navy precisely timed its operation to show up just as China made its blunder, a Cessna plane carrying ABS-CBN journalists from the Philippines was live-streaming the event from the air. Despite being intercepted by Chinese Su-30 fighter jets, the smaller propeller plane followed the Chinese jets to pass just 60 meters away at high speed, capturing the entire scene, coordinates, and event details. This was packaged into a news product and directly delivered to international media, ensuring that the operation was fully documented and legitimate. Huangyan Island, known officially as the Scarborough Shoal, lies within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. According to international law, it is Philippine territory. However, in 2012, the Chinese government forcefully took control of the island through a standoff, despite the island being under Philippine jurisdiction. Since then, Beijing's ambitions have only grown. In November 2024, China unilaterally declared its territorial sea baseline around Huangyan Island, attempting to claim the international waters as its own. consistent brutality, and sudden cowardice. In response to the U.S. military's bold operation, Beijing's reaction seemed to be a well-rehearsed performance, but one that ultimately failed to deliver. The Southern Theater Command quickly mobilized a fleet, adopting a stance of preparedness as of trying to recover some dignity after the collision scandal. However, this so-called interception fleet transformed into an escort fleet instead. They only dared to follow from a safe distance, and not a single clear image of confrontation emerged. This is because in August 2025, Beijing found itself in a particularly precarious position. It has a naval force without leadership. Both the Navy commander and the political commissar positions, the highest-ranking roles, had been vacant for months, with top-level personnel appointments still undecided. A Navy without a brain can hardly be expected to make decisive and unified commands. Instability within the Military Commission. In April, the vice chairman of the Military Commission, He Weidong, suddenly disappeared from official media, with rumors about an investigation growing rampant. The entire military leadership was in disarray, with everyone on edge. There's also pressure about the upcoming military parade. The September 3rd Grand Military Parade in Beijing is fast approaching, putting immense pressure on all units. Under such intense political pressure, who would be able to focus on real combat confrontations at the front lines? Additionally, in recent years, the military had undergone a series of purges, with the central logic being to eliminate any disloyal elements. The direct consequence of this was that many experienced commanders, those willing to take responsibility, were sidelined. They were replaced by political generals who were better at reading the room and loudly proclaiming slogans. High-level decision-makers, lacking frontline experience and professional judgment, could only issue vague, principle-based orders, such as resolutely defend sovereignty but prevent escalation. Mid-level executors, under the pressure of the loyalty mantra, prioritized not making political mistakes over winning. Faced with vague orders, they preferred to do nothing rather than do something wrong, because incompetence was seen as a matter of ability, but a misfire could be a political issue. According to internal rumors, the Southern Theater Command revised its plans regarding the U.S. warships 3 times in 1 hour. When the third version of the plan reached the frontline commander, he was completely taken aback. He couldn't and didn't dare to disobey the orders directly, but instead of reporting the execution of the plan, he picked up the communicator and reported the soldiers' most truthful state. He couldn't say, "We can't fight," and dared not mention the screams from the collision that had frightened the soldiers to the core. Instead, he conveyed his report in a tone that was clearly desperate and vague. "Sir, the morale of the troops is very low, and there's no energy. I really can't describe it. It's just, emotions are very high right now." A lower-level commander's inability to follow orders wasn't because he wanted to defy them, but because his troops, after hearing those bone-chilling screams, were mentally shattered. In the end, he could only watch helplessly as the U.S. Navy continued its freedom of navigation. To truly understand this internal collapse of bravery, one must first look at how the Chinese Communist Party reacts when dealing with others in the South China Sea. Over the years, it has used water cannons and ship collisions against Philippine supply vessels, surrounded and seized Vietnamese fishing boats, and even in March 2025, it dared to engage in an extremely dangerous high-speed harassment against a Canadian ship. This brutal playbook suddenly disappeared in the face of the USS Higgins. It wasn't that Beijing's orders had suddenly softened, but that the frontline soldiers, terrified by the tragedy of their own comrades, had lost their nerve. This fear of the strong and bullying of the weak was even more evident in the skies. While Chinese naval forces dared not confront the U.S. destroyer, in the air, the Chinese Air Force immediately became tough. When faced with a slow-moving Philippine Cessna propeller plane, Chinese Su-30 MKK fighter jets performed textbook-style air bullying, using all their tactics against the small aircraft as if to cover up the deep-rooted fear on the sea. The split performance reflects the complete breakdown of the CCP's propaganda machine. We all remember how the script used to unfold. Whenever a U.S. ship approached, official media would fire up the righteous condemnation, and the wolf warrior diplomacy would go into full force. But this time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs toned its statements down, and the People's Liberation Army daily remained silent. Admitting the collision would expose their flaws, and chaotic coordination, which is absolutely taboo in the context of the strong military dream narrative. And they can't condemn the U.S. Navy because they couldn't explain away how their escort fleet was doing nothing throughout the entire incident. Admitting they were crossed with no response is even more embarrassing than being invaded. And they couldn't shift the focus either. The Philippines documented everything with high-definition videos. In the end, this vast machine resorted to the most helpless option, cutting the power. Relevant trending topics were quickly cooled down, and some extreme nationalist comments were quietly deleted. The appearance of the U.S. warship and the embarrassing collision were carefully avoided in discussions. The silent handover of control in the South China Sea. The most profound strategic consequence of this incident is that it marks a fundamental shift in the geopolitical approach to the South China Sea. The U.S.-Philippine partnership introduced a new mode of struggle, lawfare. This was no longer just military confrontation. They continuously leveraged international law, such as the 2016 South China Sea arbitration result, on-the-ground video evidence, and international media to occupy the legal and moral high ground. The Philippines' transparency strategy became a system. Every interception, collision, and close air approach was accompanied by media coverage and uploaded to international platforms in real time. As U.S. security experts put it, the video speaks for itself. Each high-definition video clip was live evidence submitted to international courts, leaving Beijing trapped in the court of public opinion. Under the Biden administration, while Beijing faced pressure on trade, technology, and military fronts, Washington's style leaned towards institutionalized, predictable actions. The Chinese government could still respond through diplomatic buffering, economic concessions, or third-party mediation, even pressuring the U.S. to compromise in some areas. During this time, Beijing still had room to maneuver on the global stage, carrying out land reclamation in the South China Sea, conducting military exercises in the Taiwan Strait, and signaling economic agreements with the European Union. But Trump's approach was entirely different. Every step was taken right on the strategic boundary, pushing the limits, forcing opponents to either concede or face the risk of conflict escalation. Within less than half a year in office, he reinstated high tariffs on key Chinese exports and warned that the scope could be expanded at any time. This not only hit industry profits, but also created unpredictability in the eyes of foreign investors, leading capital to accelerate its exit. From the U.S.-Japan alliance, AUKUS, to U.S.-Philippine and U.S.-Vietnam military exercises, he turned the theoretical concept of Indo-Pacific security into tangible patrols and port connectivity. He restricted high-level chip and AI technology exports to China, while using American interest rate policies and capital regulations to increase China's foreign exchange pressures. In the realm of public opinion and legal warfare, he proactively amplified the South China Sea conflict between China and the Philippines, framing Beijing as a rule breaker and isolating it diplomatically. This shift not only locks Beijing into a corner in the South China Sea, but also directly impacts its strategic calculations for the Taiwan Strait. In the past, Beijing could still fantasize about using its home field advantage in the South China Sea to tie down U.S. forces and divert their attention and military resources away from the Taiwan Strait. But now, control over the South China Sea is quietly shifting toward a multilateral alliance. In the event of a crisis in the Taiwan Strait, the U.S. and its allies can not only strike from the East China Sea and Okinawa, but they can also directly push from the Scarborough Shoal and Palawan Line, forcing China into a three-front maritime battle. The result is that, while Beijing could still manage to catch its breath during the Biden era, it is now suffocating under Trump's multi-pronged approach. Without enough economic power to withstand tariffs and capital outflows, without enough diplomatic space to resolve a multilateral military encirclement, and with no ability to drag things out, Beijing is now forced to remain silent. This dramatic 48 hours reveals a new form of great power competition in the 21st century. Victory no longer depends on who has more missiles or bigger warships. A meticulously planned collision scandal, a precisely timed check-in sailing, and a globally broadcast livestream were enough to strip a seemingly powerful opponent of its voice and turn it into a laughingstock. China's home field advantage in the South China Sea is being fundamentally shaken. When a regime can only rely on silence and de-escalation to cover up its passivity, it's not from losing the trust of its audience and being relegated to the role of a mere supporting actor.